Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and these are the 10 most hated cards in Hearthstone as determined by you guys, the Hearthstone community. Now, you might be wondering how on earth I could determine such a thing. Well, it's by using data. I recently hosted a giveaway in which I asked folks for their favorite and least favorite Hearthstone cards. I gathered all that data up and determined the most popular and least popular cards among the Hearthstone community using something like almost 1,500 responses. And since that's such a large sample size, I think I can pretty safely extrapolate that to the larger Hearthstone community at large, not just Regis Kilbin subscribers and viewers. So let's go ahead and jump into the list. Starting off with number 10 is a card that you haven't seen in a very long time if you only stick to standard format. This is Dr. Boom, coming in with 1.38% of the vote. Apparently there are enough people out there playing Wild, or simply enough people out there having flashbacks of the olden days in Goblins versus Gnomes, in which Dr. Boom ruled the ladder. And here's what folks had to say about this card. Dr. Boom, he was just too overpowered and overused. Dr. Boom is my least favorite card. You just simply have to put it on the board, and you know as fact that you won the game. Now, I don't know that victories were quite that guaranteed with Dr. Boom, but truthfully, even if an opponent had an answer with like Big Game Hunter, the Boom bots just provided so much additional value that this card felt synonymous with winning in Hearthstone. And often, if your opponent played it against you and you didn't have an answer, the game was in fact over. I don't think too many folks who played Hearthstone back in the day were sad to see Dr. Boom moved into Wild format where you could stop worrying about that smug little goblin face. Moving on to the number 9 spot is a card that absolutely stunned me that it's on this list. It is the Mage spell Polymorph with 2.26% of the vote. If I was going to see any kind of card like Polymorph on this list, I thought it would be Hex instead, because Hex is a cheaper version of the same kind of card that's run by a class in Shaman that is much more hated, but Hex only ranked like 14th or 15th on the list, and somehow Polymorph itself cracked the top 10, so I guess people in particular don't like being turned into a sheep. But here's what folks had to say about Polymorph. Favorite card, Tyrion, Fordring. Least favorite card, Polymorph. Of course, if you love Tyrion, you're going to hate Polymorph. Another guy added, hated card is effing Polymorph. I hate that effing card. I could put down God himself. Oh, but no. Apparently, God himself could be turned into a sheep as well. Up next at the number 8 spot is An Auctioneer with 2.31% of the vote. My least favorite card, An Auctioneer. I feel so helpless when someone plays it. Auctioneer takes too much control away from the opposing player and can often make or break a close game. And I actually agree with those comments quite a bit. I think An Auctioneer is the card that would fit the Hall of Fame most of all, on top of things like Ragnaros or Azerdrake, simply because he's so non-interactive. Once it's played, you kind of just have to sit there and watch this movie unfold of your opponent doing all kinds of crazy things. And although I personally enjoy doing that myself in Miracle Rogue with my An Auctioneer on the board, I certainly understand why it's frustrating to people and why it might be an unhealthy aspect of the game. Moving on to the number 7 spot, it is Jade Idol with 3.17% of the vote. The card that I hate, Jade Idol, because I like control decks, and now you have infinite value that crushes control decks. Or put more simply by somebody else, this card is broken and needs to be fixed. And that's another sentiment that I can certainly agree with. Jade Idol as a win condition in really late game control style decks, or fatigue style decks in fact, is just too powerful. It's too good. Being able to generate infinite resources and infinitely large bodies means that any other deck is eventually going to run out of removal and run out of options. So if they don't have a very explicit win condition with some sort of burst damage, Jade Idol isn't a default win. It means they just absolutely win the game and you're hopeless against them. And I don't really think that's a very healthy addition to the game. Even though Jade as a mechanic I think is cool, it needs to have a cap or limit on it. Otherwise, Jade Idol Druid will just run rampant in control style metas. So now let's move on to the number 6 spot. It is Iceblock with 3.29% of the vote. My least favorite is Iceblock because Mage should not be able to be both super powerful and super resilient. My fave card is Malagos, and my least fave is Iceblock. That's another funny one like Tyrion and Polymorph. I can imagine why you'd hate Iceblock so much if you're relying on a burst combo turn from Malygos that Iceblock into Reno simply shuts down. I do understand the hate for Iceblock. It sort of denies the ultimate experience or win condition of the game itself, which is killing your opponent, right? That's what makes Hearthstone rewarding, is securing those kills. So it feels like you've done all the work to kill them once. You've played all your cards exactly right. They just deny that kill and then probably play Reno Jackson immediately afterwards to really hammer home the fact that you actually accomplished nothing at all. And that's a pretty frustrating aspect of Hearthstone. So Iceblock, since it has been so synonymous with Mage throughout the history of the game, I do think it's another card that would fit the Hall of Fame format pretty well. But I'm scared that if you did take it away, maybe Mage wouldn't even be good at all. So perhaps Iceblock has to stay around for now, just to ensure that Mage is in fact viable. And now we're on to the top 5, and these are really the cream of the crop for most hated cards. You'll see the percentages start to spiral out of control at this point because these cards stood out among the rest. Number 5 itself is actually Tunnel Trog with 5.41% of the vote. Least favorite card has to be Tunnel Trog. He starts every game off being this ridiculous 1-cost minion that gives whoever plays it too much early advantage for a single card. And that's absolutely right. I think historically, Blizzard has had some problem creating fair and balanced 1-drops. They always seem like the kinds of cards that can spiral out of control. It started back in the day with a card like Undertaker. Cards like Mana Worm can feel the same way. Tunnel Trog is certainly added to that as well. Smalltime Buccaneer was yet another addition of 2 powerful 1-drops. So Blizzard doesn't seem to understand the line that needs to be drawn, because if 1-drops like Tunnel Trog continue to grow and get powerful throughout the course of the game, essentially they decide the winner of the match on turn 1. And that's just not good for Hearthstone. At the number 4 spot is the card we all love to meme. It is the 4-mana 7/7, and it's amazing how many people actually called it the 4-mana 7/7 instead of its real name, Flame Wreath Faceless. So I had to do some extra work to actually make sure I identified all the instances of this card, since it often didn't use the actual names. But when you did all that work, it turns out Flame Wreath Faceless comes in with 6.34% of the vote. My least favorite is 4-mana 7/7. Why so OP? That puts it pretty succinctly. And then Flame Wreath Faceless, 4-mana 7/7. What? To deal with a 7/7 on turn 4 is quite tricky, if not insane. And yeah, this card is just overstated and undervalued at 4 mana. It's totally ridiculous. It's been a big part of Shaman throughout the course of the last year and a half or so, I guess, at this point. Or maybe just last year, I guess, since Whispers of the Old Gods came out. But anyway, it's the kind of card that's just so frustrating to see. And Shaman has been so good, and this card has represented just how good Shaman's been on the ladder in a lot of ways for people, both realistically in games, but also in memes on the internet. So it's no surprise to see Flame Wreath Faceless quite so high on this list. Moving on to the top 3, it is Smalltime Buccaneer at the number 3 spot with 7.12% of the vote. Now you'll note that the version of this card on the screen is the pre-nerfed version of Smalltime Buccaneer. The card was recently nerfed to have only 1 health instead of 2. That's because a lot of the responses that were provided in this giveaway, of which I collected the data and determined these numbers, were slightly before or during the nerf, so people hadn't quite had time to adjust yet to the new Smalltime Buccaneer, and in fact, the new meta that accompanied it. So I suspect that after this card was nerfed, he would have fallen down the list a little. I don't think he would have fallen off the list because there were still responses coming in after the nerf, and still some that actually still mentioned Smalltime Buccaneer. So the hate for this card hasn't gone away, even regardless of the nerf. But I did want to represent the card that most people were probably referring to on the screen. So this is, in fact, the 2-health version of Smalltime Buccaneer. And here's what a guy had to say about it. Buccaneer has dominated and really shaped the meta in the past 2.5 months, but in the worst way possible, and I'm happy that they've decided to nerf him. That's absolutely right. Pirates were just too darn good thanks to Smalltime Buccaneer. Certainly patches helped, but this is the card that I think really defined the pirate meta, because this is the card that often summoned patches, and this is the card that was harder to kill, and the card that could do 6 or 9 damage to your face before you found inadequate answer to it, because it was so cheap and so efficient. Another 1-drop in the history of Hearthstone that's just been too darn good, even though it doesn't seem as good as Tunnel Trog or Undertaker or some of those past cards. it was still quite clear that in the environment that it was in the meta of powerful pirates, Smalltime Buccaneer was very frustrating and obviously quite hated. But certainly not the most hated card of all. There's still 2 to go. At the number 2 spot is a card that kind of surprises me, but not really once I think about it. It's Reno Jackson with 12.3% of the vote. And if you think about it, essentially there are kind of 2 camps in Hearthstone, people who like to play aggressive decks and people who like to play control style decks. And for people who like aggressive decks, a really fast meta, a lot of early cost cards and rushing down your opponent with damage and minions, the kind of card to hate, of course, is Reno Jackson, because he absolutely denies that style of play. If your opponent draws him in time and is able to play him on turn 6, often you just have no gas left, you're out of resources, they have stabilized, and as the aggro player, 9 times out of 10, you've lost the game. So for so many people, Reno Jackson represents losing in Hearthstone, the way they like to play the game. And in fact, these comments here will represent that. My least favorite card is thankfully going to Wild. I hate Reno. I feel like I'm winning, and then boom, nope. Reno Jackson killed my dreams of Legend this season. Now, hilariously enough, this card was also the second most loved, the most popular card in Hearthstone. So it's clear that there are 2 camps in the game. Some people love Reno, and some people love to hate Reno. And yet he's not the most hated card. That other camp in Hearthstone clearly makes up a larger majority in my data set at least. The control players love Reno, and they absolutely hate the number 1 card on this list, Patches the Pirate, with 27.44% of the vote. That is absolutely enormous. Almost a third of people mention this card as their most hated card. Far and away the largest of any of the cards on either the popular or the most hated list. Patches the Pirate reigns as the most hated card in Hearthstone. My least favorite card is Patches because it is Patches. And I don't think it needs an explanation, smiley face. And this other fellow says, I can't stand to hear one more. I'm in charge now, so probably Patches. And ultimately, I don't think Patches himself is that problematic of a card, but he was emblematic of a meta that was so destructive in all the pirates, whether it be Rogue or Shaman or Warrior. Patches ultimately represented that style of play because he made such a dramatic entrance on the board. He's almost always there. He seems frustrating and representative because he is a legendary that's named, and he kind of becomes the icon for that style of play. Not to mention, he just does have a very annoying entrance with I'm in charge now. So there were so many reasons to bundle all of that hate into a single card, and it's clear that the Hearthstone community has done exactly that. Patches the Pirate, he is the reigning king for the most hated card in Hearthstone. And that'll do it for my list, but I'm sure you're curious what my least favorite card is. And this is one that was mentioned quite a bit. I think it was like number 16 or 17th on the list. But the card I hate most wasn't on the list. It's actually Draconid Operative. Now that might surprise some people. Priest isn't exactly a huge force on the ladder. There's, the occasional priest here and there. It's not non-existent. But I hate playing against this card. There's just so much value bundled into it. It's a 5 mana 5/6, which is a great body for 5 mana. It's a dragon, which means it not only enables and benefits from all the dragon synergies that Priest likes to do, but this battle cry is absolutely absurd. If you're holding a dragon, discover a card in your opponent's deck. Now, I don't know about you guys, but it feels like to me that no matter what, whenever they discover a card, it's exactly the card they need. It might be Fireball to burst me down. It might be some ridiculous legendary that they steal from me and ultimately get more value from than I do. It's always the perfect card. It's the perfect answer. I just can't get over this card. It's hard to deal with. It provides my opponent with absurd resources. It's a dragon. I just don't like Draconid Operative. All that said, when I think logically, I don't think this card is necessarily overpowered or bad for Hearthstone. It just personally rubs me the wrong way. And I'm sure that we all have cards like that. So if you didn't get a chance to mention your most hated or your most loved card, feel free to do that in the comments below. I'd also like to hear your take on this list. Were you surprised by the order? Surprised any cards made it at all? I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on that. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.